Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Lounging with Lloyd. Today we have a lot to discuss with a very passionate wrestling fan, who was recently just at WrestleMania 35, which is hosted right here in New Jersey at MetLife Stadium. Also, we'll have one of my classmates, Nick Federico, later on in the show, which will discuss local team sports such as the Nets, who just clinched a playoff spot, as well as the Jets and the Giants. First, I'd like to introduce Tommy McGrogan for coming on to the show. Everybody. Thank you, my man, for coming on.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Very passionate wrestling fan. So first off, before we get into it, how was WrestleMania 35? What was the atmosphere like?
WrestleMania is special for a lot of reasons. From 82,000 people filling MetLife Stadium, the energy of the crowd, the lights, the pyro, just the spectacle that is WrestleMania. You don't see it anywhere else. You don't see it at the Super Bowl. You don't see it at the World Series. WrestleMania is an identity in of itself, and WrestleMania is just so special. The show itself was absolutely fantastic. The whole weekend, WrestleMania weekend, it was a dream come true. Floor seats at WrestleMania, so it doesn't really get better than that. But it was fantastic. It was a really great time.
It was good to see you had a good time. Now, for those who aren't followers or fans of wrestling, can you give like a brief history on, the history and where it came from?
So wrestling originated or was moved to America in the 1920s. There's a lot of different periods in wrestling. So there's the classic era, the golden era, the attitude era, the ruthless aggression era, and now we're in the PG or modern era of wrestling. So there's a lot of different time periods in wrestling, and I think what differentiates all of those periods in time is not just the demographic of fans that tuned in during that time, but also the content in which World Wrestling Federation or WWE or even other companies present to these audiences. But that's the brief overview of wrestling. Right now we're in the modern era, or the PG era, which is a more family-oriented period of time in wrestling. They're really catering to families and kids, and their big tagline is putting smiles on people's faces. That's what the company is all about right now, and they're doing a really great job at that. So
you've definitely been smiling as soon as we started this conversation.
Yeah, I've been smiling all weekend.
See? What made you personally fall in love with wrestling?
I grew up with friends that were always older than me, and they loved pro wrestling. So as a little kid who was younger than them, I always felt like it was the cool thing to like what they liked. I never grew out of it. They did. But I fell in love with wrestling for the same reasons why I fell in love with superhero movies, the same reason why I've fallen in love with any other form of entertainment on television. It's entertaining.
Well, as we go through the outline of these questions, someone who's not a wrestling fan or wrestling follower, the terminology can be very different, could be taken differently. So I see here it was started in 1985. What's the difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, what's the difference between WrestleMania and the normal matches that we see, on TV today?
So WrestleMania, there's such a big fan base in pro wrestling, so WrestleMania requires a big stadium. 9 times out of 10, it's an open stadium. So this year was at MetLife Stadium, 82,000 plus people filled that stadium. It was a sold-out show. The difference between that is just the audience and the venue. So WrestleMania is for big stadiums, but if you want to talk about Monday Night Raw, Tuesday Night SmackDown, NXT, 205 Live, those are held in venues like Madison Square Garden, the Barclays Center, Prudential Center, so smaller arenas. Those usually hold about 16 to 20,000 people. So that's kind of the difference between it. But as far as the matches that take place at these shows, every match is different. Every opponent is different. So John Cena could be wrestling Hulk Hogan one night, or the next night John Cena could be wrestling The Rock or Stone Cold. So every match is choreographed a little bit differently, but the matches are all basically the same. They all get a time limit, and wrestlers kind of stay close to the moves that they're familiar with. So I guess like their wrestling arsenal in a sense.
Okay. Where can you usually watch some of these matches? Either YouTube, or is like a special network for it?
So Monday Night Raw, Tuesday Night SmackDown, 205 Live, they're all hosted on the USA Network, and then WWE also has a WWE Network, which is basically like Netflix for wrestling fans. So from day one to the current period of time, they have all their content. So it's WWE Network. It's for $9.99 a month for you wrestling fans. So that's where you can watch it. Yeah.
You mentioned The Rock, but his, I guess, legal name Dwayne Johnson.
Yes.
I want to know, where do these superstars get their names?
Wrestling names are kind of weird in a sense. So they'll come up with a wrestling name.
They'll come up with it.
They'll come up with the wrestling name. So there's something called independent wrestling, which is basically smaller wrestling companies where they wrestle in high school gyms or, other auditoriums and stuff like that. They're up and coming wrestlers.
Okay.
So they'll come up with their names on that scene. But if you go to a bigger stage like WWE or TNA or Ring of Honor, New Japan Pro Wrestling, AEW, sometimes these promoters or the owners of these companies will say, you know what, I'm not really a big fan of that name. That's not a name per se that we can market off of, so they'll give them a name.
Really? But are they happy with this sometimes? Have there ever been any, no, I don't want that name, I'll make my own?
So, sometimes yes. So some wrestlers actually get to keep their name from when they created it. So, for example, there was this wrestler that came on the scene. His name is Samoa Joe. When he got to WWE, they were kind of playing around with, I don't know if we can call you that because you've used it for prior companies and copywriting and trademarking and stuff like that.
It's always the copyright. Like, you have to give permission to use the name.
He's wrestled for old big wrestling companies. So there was this company called Impact Wrestling or TNA. He wrestled under the name Samoa Joe, so they owned the name. They had to get legal ownership over the name first before they can actually call him Samoa Joe on WWE programming. But they did it, but it was a big discussion whether or not they were going to do it. So they were probably going to give him a new name, but they really fought to get it. But there was a lot of lawsuits and stuff involved in that one. So and that goes along with a lot of pro wrestlers. It's all about marketing. But I don't think wrestlers have a problem with a name change unless it's something that they've gone by all of their career.
Yeah. But
I also don't think a lot of them care either, because as long as they're making money, why would they?
That's what
especially on a stage like WWE. So.
That's what you're in the business for. Now, according to CBS Sports, this year was a very historic WrestleMania. Women like Ronda Rousey, Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch. This is the very first time that women were in a main event. Why do you think it took so long?
Well, in the earlier periods of wrestling, and this can go back to the beginning of time, even up to recent time. So women were objectified in the earlier periods of wrestling. They were subjected to 1 and 5 minute matches. They wrestled in what they call a bra and panties match. They wrestled in pudding, pillow fights, lingerie, and dancing contests. They were objectified. They were looked at as, for lack of a better term, eye candy. And they weren't portrayed as superstars. They weren't marketed as empowering women. Yeah. But WWE, I don't want to say that this is the root of why we're doing a women's revolution in professional wrestling right now, but years ago when Ronda Rousey was 12-0, main eventing UFC pay-per-views and making millions and millions of dollars,
definitely changed the game.
It was a game changer, and I would imagine WWE was looking at something like that, saying, wow, we are so behind on the times, we need to start our own women's revolution, which is when Total Divas, Total Bellas came about. Women main evented WrestleMania. They have their own women's tag team championships, which is something that we've never seen because their roster with women has never been so extensive before. But now they have more women than ever, and they're marketed like superstars. They're main eventing pay-per-views. They have their own championships. They have their own reality TV shows and spots on WWE Network. They're absolutely killing it, and it's really great for everybody, not just the women demographic out there, but it also sends a good message to younger girls. They're empowering younger girls. They're inspiring. They're superheroes right now. It's a great time to be a wrestling fan, especially for the women. So
great. I'm glad that all the women are giving a very empowering and strong message to young girls coming up, not only for wrestling but also in society.
Yeah.
For you, I wanted to ask, not only WrestleMania matches but any other championships. What ones are memorable to you?
So there are a couple different brands, and every brand has their own respective championships. So there's the WWE Championship, which is on SmackDown Live. Then there's the Universal Championship, which is on Monday Night Raw. Then each division between SmackDown and Raw, they have their own women's championships on both brands, and they also have their own separate tag team division championships. But then there are other shows like 205 Live that have the Cruiserweight Championship, and 205 is basically wrestlers who wrestle under 205 pounds. So WWE caters to
I got they slid that in
everybody.
there.
Yeah, so when you watch UFC, you have the heavyweights and the welterweights, and so the divisions go down. But they also have the United States Championship, the Intercontinental Championship. Throughout history, they've had numerous different championships. But what was the rest of the question? I'm sorry, I got really...
No, I mean, it's really more just what did you take from. So, but I'm glad that you mentioned the 205 Live, the SmackDown, because I wanted to know how do those superstars get those brands? Basically, like how are they determined to go to Raw, SmackDown? How are they selected?
So it's all based on what WWE wants, or the creative team. So they'll look at their roster and say, okay, well, this person's going to make more money on this show, or we're going to put them in a more prominent position on this show. So Monday Night Raw is 3 hours, and SmackDown is 2 hours.
Sounds like a class.
Yeah, and then
CCM students, you know what I'm talking about.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of programming, but when you have a 3-hour program, Monday Night Raw is more likely to have more superstars and more superstar power. So I guess bigger names on that roster, because you need to keep the fans entertained for an entire 3 hours. So there's some really big names over there right now. You have Ronda Rousey, you have Brock Lesnar, you have Bobby Lashley, Dave Bautista, or Drax the Destroyer. He's on Monday Night Raw. He just wrestled his retirement match on Sunday at WrestleMania against Triple H.
Really?
But you have a lot of top names over there. So I guess the answer to the question is wherever WWE wants these superstars to be.
Okay. I have a friend that's very passionate about wrestling. And, even if you haven't followed or you're not as passionate as you and one of my friends, I want to know we've seen, some of these wrestlers get hit with some very, how could you say,
Weapons?
these weapons. I was trying to find a word, but they're very, they hurt. Basically things that you think that wouldn't hurt. I want to know, is it plastic? Is it real? You gotta help me out here. I'm basically asking, what's the deal with these chairs? As you say, these weapons. I've seen sticks. I've seen, even the tables.
Yeah.
When they get slammed on the tables, is that like one of these kind of tables, or is easily breakable, easily replaceable?
So the weapons are normally stationed under the ring, but not every match allows you to use weapons. So some matches could just be a regular wrestling match, just a one-on-one match, but if you use a weapon, you'll get disqualified. So weapons kind of mean steel chair, thumbtacks, steel steps, baseball bats, barbed wire bats. There's a lot of different weapons. I think the tables are made out of sawdust. I don't think it's exactly a really, really hard surface, because the table still needs to break. Yeah. But you also don't want to hurt the superstars either. I don't think the table hurts that much, but I do know that the steel chair hurts extensively. We've seen superstars get busted open off one shot to the head with a steel chair, but they don't hit each other in the head with the steel chair anymore, because there have been a lot of concussions. And back in 2006, hopefully my knowledge is correct on this one, so there was a wrestler, his name is Chris Benoit. He was involved in a double murder suicide. He strangled his wife, suffocated his son, and then hung himself. It was this big thing. What came out of the autopsy was that his brain had so much damage that they kind of came to terms that he had the brain of an 85-year-old man with Alzheimer's in his 40s. There was so much brain damage, and the media really beat WWE up for this because they weren't exactly the safest when it came to concussions and other protocols when it came to using weapons. But after that, WWE changed everything. You can't hit each other in the head with weapons. There's certain moves like pile drivers that aren't allowed to be used anymore. For the most part, yes, these weapons are real. There's a certain way to take these shots, but that doesn't mean that it's not hurting them. Because I think a steel chair would most definitely hurt if someone like Brock Lesnar is whipping it at you. So on Sunday, Brock Lesnar threw Seth Rollins over the announce table, and he had welts and cuts all over his back. I was like, wow, that probably really hurts, especially getting whipped around by a guy like Brock Lesnar. He's a weapon himself. He doesn't need a weapon. He doesn't need a chair. He's Brock Lesnar.
Big boy, big body.
Yeah.
Want to say thank you, Tommy.
Appreciate it.
Unfortunately,
Thank you.
we couldn't have you show us some of the special moves, but definitely we can have you on next time. And thank you for sharing the history as well as some of the upcoming, WrestleMania as well as more upcoming events coming up in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. We're going to take a short break, and we'll come back, and we'll be bringing on my classmate Nick Federico as well as Maxwell Struss, and we're going to be discussing New York sports. See you then.